right, guys, welcome back to Ramblings, which is where I'm talking about random shit while we're playing this otherwise kind of boring game called Eve. It's not that it's boring, it's that I don't really understand it entirely yet. So, while I'm continuing to fucking make these goddamn antimatter charge crystals, each of these I have to get a certain amount of this and that and the other, put them together and make this stuff. And then it takes 4 minutes and a half to make it. So while we do that, let's talk about this idea that we're living in a simulacrum. In other words, are we living in a simulation? And, you know, it's almost gotten to the point where it's a joke. You know, it's almost like, are we living in a simulation? Oh, that's so quirky and funny to think about. This idea that we're living in a simulation, that nothing is real. You know, hey, should you, take the blue pill or the red pill? You know, it's almost gotten to the point where it really is sort of that Matrix-like thing of like, oh, it's either a simulation or not. But I want to suggest to you that, yeah, you are living in a simulation, and not just in some sort of quirky conspiracy theory way, but like absolutely you are. And I think I can scientifically prove that you're living in a simulation. So let's just suppose that the universe exists out there somewhere in a very objective way. I would suggest that's almost entirely certain. you know, that atoms are smashing together light years away from you and you're not aware of it, but it's still happening. Like suns are burning, so far away you can't see them, and yet they're still there doing their thing. So reality exists. Okay. I hope we can all agree upon that. If not, then, you're a Trump fan. Just kidding. Not really. Hold on. Swig a beer there. So here's the deal. You are absolutely living in a simulation, because what your brain is an information gathering device, and it has various senses with which it can determine what is around it, right? So we have the senses, we have sight, sound, smell, tactile, so forth. People like to claim that we have further senses, psychic senses, heretofore unproven senses. None of that matters. All that matters is our brain is a box in a room, and our senses are windows out of this room. But that's an overly simplified way of putting it, because a window is a very straightforward thing. It's a pane of glass. You look outside, look, there's what's outside. But we already know that our senses can be fooled, right? Our vision, our hearing, our olfactory, can be fooled. So it's better to think of, if you tried to make, and this is where we're learning so much about humanity. For instance, we're learning about the human brain as we try to create artificial intelligence, right? So we're trying to create artificial intelligence, so it forces us to think about how we think, right? So as we make robots, we realize that we need to have them be aware of their environments. Therefore, we need sensory feedback, immediate sensory feedback. If a robot bumps into something, it has to realize, hey, I just bumped into something. I need to turn a different direction. That's relatively simple, right? That's basic. The point being, though, what your brain is doing, whether you know it or not, is creating an image of the universe inside of your head based on sensory information that it receives. So you have a simulation of the universe inside your head that you live in. And if you think you live in the real universe, then I'm sorry, you're woefully underinformed. You don't live in the real world. If you lived in that real universe, if you lived in that actual universe, then you would be aware of everything around you. Everything. Every little worm crawling in the earth, every little rabbit scampering away, every little deer nuzzling against trees or whatever the fuck deer do, right? You're not aware of all those things. And the reason you're not aware of all those things is you're aware of only what exists in the simulation of the universe in your head. Okay, so my grandma, God bless her, she drove she drove big cars because she was of that greatest generation, back when they drove cars that were tanks, basically. They were just giant. She drove giant fucking cars until she was well into her late 80s. And she got into accident after accident. Man, and it was funny because I watched her kids, my mom and my uncle, her son and her daughter, would beg her to stop driving, but she was their mom, so I'm Italian. If your Italian mother tells you something, then that's it. It's over, And she was like, no, I'm going to keep driving. And so it was funny and yet not funny at the same time. Is she'd have an accident, she'd go before the judge, and my mom and my uncle would be there, her kids would be there, and they'd be like, please, judge, take her license away, please take her license away. And the judge would look at her, and she had this puppy dog eyes, and just, oh, please, Your Honor, I didn't see him coming this time, blah blah blah. And then the judge would let her keep her license, and literally my uncle and my mom were like, no, fuck no, please. And the reason I bring this up, it seems like a weird thing to bring up, but every time she got into an accident, she said they came out of nowhere. She didn't understand. She was just driving, and this car came out of nowhere and just hit her. And here's the thing. She was right. In the universe, inside her head, with limited sensory perception, because, by the way, I forgot to mention this, she was going blind. In her universe, in her head, the coast was clear. She could pull out onto that street because in the construct of her universe that she had built in her head, as we all have built in our heads, the coast was clear. And so what I mean to suggest to you is, yes, you do live in a simulation. You absolutely do. And this is not some kind of Matrix tinfoil hat, like, oh, we're living in a dream of somebody else, a giant's dreaming of us, and someday he'll wake up and we'll all disappear. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm saying you literally live in a simulation. And the simulation is created by your brain and by the senses that your brain utilizes to map that simulation. Now, that should humble everyone. That should humble us all. Because that means if you admit that the world you live in is not actually the real world, then automatically you have to admit that there could be flaws in your perception, which means that the world you live in might possibly not actually mirror the real world, quote unquote, real world. And I say quote unquote because at this point now, if we're basing the real world on what we perceive it to be, perceptions vary, right? At the same time, if you run full tilt against a brick wall, I promise you, your teeth are going to get broken out. It doesn't matter what you perceive. So there is some ultimate true, actual physical reality, right? But the idea of what I'm trying to get at here is the idea that we don't actually live in that world. And I'm not even sure if we want to live in that world, because that world has infinite variables. So, by the way, in the background, I'm just building and delivering, trying to just keep this process going. It's one of those boring sort of processes where you just keep on building. Here we go. Start another one. I have to keep going until I have 1,000 of these. I think I have a few more to go. Anyway, the philosophical point we're talking about today is the idea that, look, you do live in an artificial world. Okay, you do. And the artificial world is the world that your brain has constructed in your mind based on the sensory input that it has available. Now, that's not to say you discount it. Well, nothing's real. I can't believe anything. No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is be skeptical. Be skeptical. Fuck, be skeptical of your memory. We know now that memories can be impressed upon us, implanted upon us. So be skeptical of all that shit. And, when it comes to memory, man, that's a whole new bag. I'm going to write that down because memory is a funny thing. I'm writing it down right now because I'm going to talk about this in a future episode. So, you guys remember that time when you were a toddler? And your family always talks about this. Remember that time? And honestly, your mom, every time she gets going, she'll talk about when you were a toddler and you did that thing. Remember, what was it that you did? Okay, I don't know what it was you did. But it's a story that your family tells about you when you were a toddler, when you were a baby. Okay, remember that? Let me just tell you, no, you don't remember that. You remember what your family tells you remember about it. Okay, so we'll get into that because that's how, I'm telling you, families push family members, children, into certain roles by telling stories about them. And those stories become memories to the people, but they're not necessarily true. Okay, I'm getting off on a side tangent. We'll come back to that later, though, because that's an important thing. The stories that our families tell about us begin to define us. And I feel like sometimes we need to get the fuck out of those storylines. Okay, we'll talk about that in a future episode. All I want to talk about here, right now, is the fact that you absolutely do live in a simulation. Don't think otherwise. If you think you live in the real world, you're fucking wrong. You live in a box. Your brain is in a box. That box has sensory input. That input is then used to create a simulated universe inside your head. Now, that's not a bad thing. It's a really good thing, actually, because otherwise you're just in the dark with sensory input flowing in that's meaningless and useless. But we are evolved. We are creatures that can put that sensory data together and create a simulated universe. And inside that simulated universe, we can act and react. And if our senses are good enough, and if our judgment is good enough, we can actually be successful in the outer world, right? We can actually make decisions based on our simulation that actually make us successful in the real world. But I think it's important for us to realize it's a simulation. What's in your head is a simulation. Why is that important? Because simulations can be flawed. Have you ever just believed something with all your heart and just been like, no, that's 100% true. I know it. Boom. Certainly. No, it's totally true. And then it turns out not to be true. That feels shitty. That feels so shitty. Let me give you my example. It's a petty example. It's a terrible example of like, I was 100% certain, man. Like, I was so sure of this thing. All right. So it's actually super nerdy. All right. So I'm a Deadwood fan. I love the show Deadwood. Deadwood only has 3 seasons. It's a great show, man. If you haven't seen Deadwood, just go get it. You know, if you don't have it, go pirate it. You know, go to Pirate Bay. You know, the show's already made its money. You know, I'm not advocating theft here, but it's like the show's over. Go get it. Deadwood. It's a great fucking show. Anyway, one of the main characters, Bullock, he's kind of like the reluctant sheriff. He doesn't want to be the sheriff, but they push him into it. He has a wife, and she's sort of this tall, blonde woman, attractive, sort of Nordic looking woman, right? Okay. Now, let's shift gears over to Battlestar Galactica. Not the old one, but the new one. The new Battlestar Galactica has this Cylon woman, and she sort of tortures the main scientist guy. She's also tall, Nordic, beautiful woman. I knew that those two women were the same actress. I swear to God, I knew it. I knew it with all my heart. And I had a friend, and I was like, no, that's the same woman. Bullock's wife from Deadwood is the same as the main Cylon woman in Battlestar Galactica. It's the same woman. And he was like, no, man, no. And in my construct of a universe, in my reality, they were the same person. I swear to God, they were the same person. And, you know, let me just say this. As a 51-year-old man, when I was a kid, when you had this kind of disagreement, it was basically like, well, okay, whatever you say, you know, like it was basically like everybody just got to keep their own facts intact. But no, now we have the internet. And we Googled it. And I was wrong. It's not the same actress at all. It's not. Now, I will say this. Bullock's wife from Deadwood is the same woman that is the wife from Breaking Bad. If you want to get weirdly nerdy in terms of television, she is the same woman as the wife from Breaking Bad, but she's not the Cylon woman from Battlestar Galactica. And it fucked me up. It really did. It fucked me up. But here's why. Because in the universe I had constructed in my head, in my simulation, that was the same woman. And I had to readjust my simulation. And it was painful because I thought my simulation was reality. But look, this is why being wrong hurts. It's because being wrong is more than just being wrong. It's being unreal. It's a crack in your reality. So look, what I'm trying to tell you here is if you can recognize that you're not living in reality, if you can recognize that you're living in some kind of simulated universe, then what you can realize is that sometimes there are flaws in the simulation. It doesn't mean that reality is breaking. It's no knock against you personally. It's no insult against you personally. It just means there is a flaw in the simulation. Okay? This is big because one of the biggest problems that people have is it's hard to convince them that they're wrong. And I'm convinced, I believe the reason is that they've adopted that as their reality. But it's not. It's not their reality. It's their concept of reality, right? So this is really, really important. And as I create these stupid ass antimatter charge cubes for a fucking, let me deliver them. Do I have more to do? Or am I done forever? Please. Am I done forever? No, I've got another to do. All right. So I feel like this is important though, because if you can realize that we are living in artificial realities that are simulated out of necessity by our brain in order to cope with the world around us, then being wrong is not a bad thing at all. In fact, being wrong is a correction. Okay? It's a correction of the simulation. It's a refinement. It's a good thing. Okay? It's a good thing. Now, most of the people listening to me right now are nerds, and you probably get this. You're probably not somebody who doubles down on fake bullshit. When your simulation is challenged, you double down on it. You're like, well, no, you just don't get this, and this is why I'm right when it seems like I'm wrong, you know? But the important thing I want to get across here is, nobody should take it personally. If your simulation is proven wrong, good. That just means you're aligning better. You're aligning your simulation better with what's really happening out there. Okay, like if you're in a submarine and you've got your periscope, you've got your little periscope up to see what's going on on the surface world, right? That's what we're doing here. That's what I'm talking about. And if we're wrong, that just means we're refining our simulation. Our simulation is getting better. But make no mistake about it. No matter how you refine it, no matter how much better it gets, it's a simulation. And it can always be wrong. Always. Okay? Don't get attached. It's a simulation. You're not living in actual reality. If you were in actual reality, you could say, no, that's the way it is. It's real. You can't convince me otherwise. But no, dude, no. You're in a box that has sensory input, and within that box, you're putting together this little jigsaw puzzle image of what you think the world really is. It's a simulation in your own head. So, be skeptical and be okay if evidence tells you that you're wrong. Be skeptical of that evidence even. Maybe you're really right. Like, look, I'm not saying just every little bit, you're wrong, so okay, I'm wrong. No, I'm just saying we have to be open to the idea that the concept of our universe that we hold in our head is not real. Okay? It's not. It's a simulation. And guys, that's okay.